Rain poured down in relentless sheets, soaking the streets and drenching every passerby. Amid the chaos, Vivian Brooks spotted a small figure huddled on the cracked sidewalk. Kenny, trembling and drenched, looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, don't tell my parents," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Her heart tightened instantly. What could drive a child to fear the very people meant to protect him? In that fleeting moment, a connection sparked between them, a fragile, urgent trust that could change everything. Who was this boy running from neglect? What secrets had he carried silently? And could one woman's courage truly make a difference in a world that often looked the other way? Before we dive into this gripping journey of resilience, compassion, and quiet heroism, take a moment to follow the channel. Witness the full story of Vivian and Kenny, and see how courage and empathy can ripple into extraordinary change. Are you ready to discover how one act of kindness can transform lives forever? Vivian Brooks moved through the marble halls of the city's wealthiest apartments with a practiced grace, her gloved hands polishing surfaces that gleamed under the warm, artificial light. Each sweep of her cloth carried with it years of quiet endurance, of invisible labor that went unnoticed by those who inhabited these spaces. Her back ached, dull, persistent reminder of the long hours and physical strain, but her mind was a refuge of empathy and care, filled with small imaginings of kindness she could share with those around her. Even amidst the luxury she cleaned, she never lost sight of the stark contrast with her own life, the cramped apartment she called home, where peeling paint framed the walls, and the constant hum of uncertainty that accompanied unpaid bills and dwindling groceries. At 28, Vivian had learned to become both invisible and indispensable. Caring for her ailing mother, whose hands trembled even while stirring tea, and guiding her younger brother Tom, a bright but sometimes aimless 15-year-old, had shaped her into someone who balanced necessity with generosity. Her days began before dawn, the smell of toast and tea mingling with a quiet resolve that whatever the day demanded, she would meet it. She never allowed herself to pause long enough to feel bitter. Instead, she cultivated compassion as if it were an essential resource, one that replenished her spirit even when the world seemed indifferent. It was in these quiet, seemingly insignificant gestures that her heart truly shone. Vivian shared extra bread with elderly neighbors whose families had long since abandoned them, leaving them to the loneliness of apartment corridors and dimly lit kitchens. She tutored children in the building, whispering encouragements as small hands traced letters and numbers on worn notebooks, her patience infinite, her voice gentle yet steady. "Try again, it's okay to make mistakes," she would say, brushing a lock of hair from a child's forehead, feeling the warmth of trust as a tangible balm against the coldness of her surroundings. These moments, invisible to most, were the lifeblood of her existence, a quiet defiance against a world that often overlooked the value of empathy. In the solitude of her modest apartment, fatigue often pressed against her chest like a tangible weight. Yet, even in those moments when her body begged for rest and her mind wandered to worry over her mother's health or Tom's schooling, a flicker of hope remained. She imagined a world where such efforts were noticed, not for recognition or praise, but as an acknowledgement of humanity, of lives intertwined through small acts of care. She remembered the nights when Tom would curl beside her, whispering fears about school and life, and she would hold him close, whispering back, "We will manage, we always do." Those whispers, those shared breaths of quiet reassurance, were a testament to the resilience and love that defined her. Even the world outside her apartment walls could not dim the warmth she carried. In the park, she would pause to offer encouragement to a child struggling with a bike, or to smile at a solitary elder feeding pigeons. These gestures were small rebellions against indifference, yet they left echoes in those she touched. Vivian understood the invisible threads that connected human beings, the glances unnoticed, the kindness unacknowledged, and the moments of shared vulnerability that shaped character and heart alike. She had learned, sometimes painfully, that life's burdens were heavier when borne alone, and lighter when empathy was offered freely, without expectation. And so, day after day, Vivian moved through her world, both seen and unseen, carrying a heart steadfast in love, courage, and resilience. She bore witness to suffering, to neglect, and to fleeting beauty, never allowing despair to harden her spirit. She was a quiet lighthouse, standing resilient against the tides of hardship, her acts of care radiating outward in ways that would someday ripple beyond her own awareness. In her mind, she often imagined a day when her efforts would bloom into something larger, a life where her perseverance could inspire and heal, where the invisible struggles she bore would be honored not just in gratitude, but in the lives of those she touched. Beneath the uniform and the gloves, beneath the exhaustion and quiet sighs in the night, Vivian carried the unwavering promise of her heart that love, integrity, and small acts of courage, however unnoticed, could leave a mark deeper than wealth, louder than status, and more enduring than recognition. Her life, though quietly spent, was a testament to the unseen heroes of the world, those who act from compassion, not expectation, and whose quiet bravery nurtures hope in the hearts of all who cross their path. At work, Vivian often felt the cold, invisible weight of judgment pressing down on her. The apartments she cleaned were pristine, yet every polished surface seemed to echo the scrutiny she endured. A glance from a patron, a flicker of disdain or impatience, could cut deeper than words, leaving a shadow across her chest that lingered long after the encounter ended. Whispers from colleagues, small criticisms muttered under breath, piled together like invisible bricks, pressing into the foundation of her spirit. Each day, Vivian carried these subtle slights as quietly as she could, learning to navigate humiliation without losing her balance, though inside, the quiet ache remained. On that particular morning, Vivian had done something small but significant. She handed leftover sandwiches to street children huddled under awnings from the early drizzle. Their grateful smiles, shy and cautious, flickered in her chest like warm embers. And yet, when she returned to her duties, she caught the disapproving eyes of the employers, the subtle curl of lips, the judgment that her generosity was naive, even foolish. Do they even notice? A small bitter thought whispered in the corners of her mind. Does any of this matter? It was a question she had asked herself countless times, a shadow of doubt that haunted the spaces between her purposeful actions. As she straightened the last vase of orchids, she glanced out the window into a manicured yard where children played. Their laughter rang clear, innocent, and untroubled, yet was tinged with privilege, a reminder of a world she would never fully inhabit. Among them, Kenny, the youngest son of the family, lingered at the edges, his small frame dwarfed by the expansiveness of the garden. Vivian noticed the way his gaze flitted between the laughter of his siblings and the towering figures of his parents, searching, always searching, for recognition that rarely came. In his solitude, she recognized a reflection of her own life, a constant, quiet yearning to be seen, to matter, even for a fleeting moment. Her chest tightened as she imagined the boy's life behind closed doors, meals eaten in silence, reprimands delivered with impatience, expectations that weighed heavier than his small shoulders could bear. Vivian understood, perhaps better than anyone else in that building, the loneliness that thrived even in the midst of abundance. She recalled her own childhood, nights spent listening to the raspy breaths of her mother and the occasional coughs of her younger brother, while she held herself together with determination and whispered promises that they would survive, they would endure, and they would thrive. In the quiet, under the polished chandeliers and mirrored walls, Vivian allowed herself a fleeting moment of reflection. Her dignity had often been tested by eyes that could not see past appearances, by voices that measured her by status and not by heart. And yet, she clung stubbornly to her purpose. She reminded herself that acts of kindness, however invisible, held a weight far greater than fleeting ridicule or judgment. Every extra sandwich, every whispered encouragement, every moment of patience with a struggling child was a ripple that could, in time, create waves of change. Later that afternoon, she found herself sitting quietly on a park bench during a brief break. The air carried a faint chill, mingled with the scent of wet grass and the distant aroma of bakery bread. She watched children chase one another, their laughter forming a melodic backdrop that contrasted sharply with the silence of her own reflection. Her mind wandered to Kenny again, the boy who often lingered unseen, quiet in the corners, craving a warmth that was withheld from him at home. She realized that in his unnoticed presence, there was a lesson waiting to be taught and learned, that humility, compassion, and the courage to care for another, even in the face of judgment, were the truest measures of strength. As she returned to her duties, Vivian adjusted her apron with deliberate calm. Each polished surface, each careful arrangement of furniture was more than a task. It was a meditation, a quiet act of reclaiming her own dignity amid the scrutiny of others. Her hands moved with purpose, her movements steady and assured, even as the sting of unspoken judgments lingered at the edges of her awareness. She allowed herself a quiet thought that someday perhaps her efforts, these small, unseen sacrifices, would ripple outward, reaching beyond the walls that confined her labor and the gaze that often overlooked her humanity. In those moments, the connection between herself and Kenny deepened silently. She imagined his small hands, tentative yet eager, reaching for a pencil to draw or a toy to share, reflecting the same desire she carried in her own heart, to be seen, to matter, to belong. And while the world around her often diminished both their presences, in that quiet acknowledgment, a spark of recognition glimmered, a shared understanding that even amidst humiliation, love and care could persist, nurturing strength where others saw only weakness. By the time she returned to the building, the shadows had shifted with the setting sun, casting long lines across polished floors. Vivian felt a quiet pride, not for the recognition of others, but for her unwavering commitment to do good, to nurture life, and to plant seeds of kindness that she hoped would one day bloom far beyond her own visibility. In the echo of whispered judgments and fleeting glances, she carried her own resilience, an unshakable belief that the smallest acts of care could, indeed, illuminate the darkest corners of a life, and perhaps, one day, touch the soul of a child who had known neglect. The rain fell steadily, a relentless percussion on the city's pavement, turning sidewalks into rivers of shimmering gray. Vivian Brooks hurried along, her coat pulled tight, her umbrella doing little more than deflecting the droplets that found their way through the edges. Her hands, still damp from cleaning earlier, felt chilled, her muscles sore from a day that had begun before dawn and stretched into exhaustion. Yet, even in the downpour, her attention remained vigilant, scanning the familiar streets, noticing the small dramas and quiet struggles of those around her. It was then she saw him. A small figure, no older than 10, huddled against a cracked wall, shivering violently in the rain. His clothes were soaked, sticking to his frame, and his head was bowed as if the weight of the world rested on his tiny shoulders. Panic and instinct collided in her chest, and before thought could overtake her, she approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" Her voice was soft, trembling slightly with concern, yet anchored in the certainty that someone needed to protect him. The boy looked up, wide eyes filled with fear and vulnerability. "Please, don't tell my parents," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. He had run away, driven by a combination of fear and the crushing pressure of expectations he could not meet. Vivian's heart clenched. She could see in him the echo of so many children she had helped, the same loneliness she herself had felt growing up. Without hesitation, she knelt, wrapping her coat around his small frame, the damp fabric providing more comfort than warmth. As they walked through puddles toward her apartment, the boy's small fingers clutched the edges of the coat, and she could feel his body trembling against hers. "You'll be safe with me," she murmured, not as a promise of grand protection, but as a vow of empathy and presence. Each step was a negotiation between fear and trust, a silent understanding forming that, for this moment, they would be each other's anchor in the storm. When they reached her modest apartment, Vivian guided him inside, removing his soaked shoes and wrapping him in a warm towel. Steam rose from the mug of tea she handed him, and he clutched it as though it were a lifeline, the warmth seeping slowly into his frozen limbs. She watched him, the weight of his trust pressing softly on her chest, and she understood the gravity of the secret he had shared. In protecting him, she was stepping into a role that carried responsibility far beyond her own life, a guardian of childhood innocence in a world that often demanded compliance and silence. Why did you run away?" she asked gently, crouching to meet his eyes. His gaze flitted down, ashamed. I just can't do what they want. I'm always wrong. I'm not enough." The words were heavy, almost suffocating, and Vivian felt a familiar ache in her chest, a reflection of her own insecurities and the relentless weight of others' expectations she had carried through her own adolescence. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You are enough," she said softly, "more than enough. And it's okay to feel afraid." For hours, the rain continued, drumming on the roof, a constant reminder of the world outside their small sanctuary. They shared quiet conversations, tentative at first, then growing in confidence. Kenny, the boy who had often lingered unnoticed, began to unravel his fears, sharing fragments of his world, the pressures of perfection, and the loneliness that came from a lack of true attention. Vivian listened, offering not judgment, but presence, her responses gentle and grounding. "We can face it together," she said at one point, and the simplicity of the words carried profound reassurance. As night fell, the city lights glimmered through the rain-streaked windows, casting a soft glow on the worn furniture and familiar clutter of her home. Vivian watched Kenny curl up with a blanket, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips as exhaustion overtook anxiety. She realized then that their connection had shifted something fundamental in both their lives. He was learning to trust, to lean on someone who genuinely cared, while she rediscovered the quiet thrill of guiding a child not through discipline or instruction, but through empathy, patience, and emotional shelter. The encounter, simple yet monumental, left a mark that neither would forget. In the shadow of the storm, a fragile bond had been forged, one that whispered of safety, understanding, and the transformative power of human connection. For Vivian, it was a reminder of why she persevered in the quiet acts of care that had defined her life. And for Kenny, it was the first step toward realizing that being seen and valued was not a privilege reserved for the lucky, but a possibility born from courage, kindness, and trust. Even as exhaustion pulled at her limbs, Vivian felt a gentle warmth in her chest, a flicker of hope that, despite the world's indifference, moments of compassion could carve space for growth, resilience, and transformation. Tonight, the rain had washed away more than the city's grime. It had cleansed fear, replacing it with the tender beginnings of connection, courage, and mutual reliance. And in that quiet, rain-soaked evening, both lives, though different in so many ways, had been irrevocably changed. Home was never simple for Vivian Brooks. The modest apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother Tom was a place of love, yes, but also of constant negotiation and responsibility. Her mother, once vibrant and full of laughter, now moved with careful deliberation, her frailty a silent reminder of years spent carrying burdens. Even small tasks required guidance, stirring a pot, walking to the mailbox, answering the persistent hum of phone calls. Vivian had learned to anticipate her mother's needs before they were voiced, to fill the silences with gentle words and attentive presence. Tom, her 15-year-old brother, was bright and imaginative but lacked direction without guidance. Homework often became a battleground between curiosity and distraction. Vivian patiently sat beside him, her hand hovering over his as he struggled with numbers and letters, coaxing him toward understanding with quiet encouragement. "It's okay to make mistakes, Tom," she would say. "You're learning, and that's what matters." Her words, though soft, carried authority born of experience, a reminder that patience and persistence often mattered more than quick results. In these moments, the apartment felt alive with small victories, laughter, and lessons that shaped character more than grades ever could. Into this fragile ecosystem entered Kenny, the boy from the affluent building Vivian worked in, a child who had wandered into her life with fear clinging to his small frame. At first, he was tentative, wary of the modest apartment, unsure the kindness extended to him. But slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds, he began to breathe easier. Even in a space that lacked the luxury of his home, he found warmth, structure, and a sense of being truly seen. Vivian noticed the subtle shifts in his posture, the way his eyes no longer darted nervously at imagined judgment, and the rare moments when a small smile tugged at his lips without fear of reprimand. Marta, Vivian's longtime neighbor and confidant, often sat with her over steaming cups of coffee, offering wisdom born from years of observation and experience. "You're doing the right thing," she said one afternoon, her voice calm but resolute. He's learning more from you in these weeks than they could ever teach him with all their money and rules. Vivian smiled, weary but reassured, grateful for the gentle affirmation that she was not alone in her choices. Marta's presence was a reminder that even amidst chaos, support and understanding could be found in unexpected places. Kenny, too, began to grow through these connections. He helped Tom with homework, mimicking Vivian's patient methods, his small fingers guiding the pencil with care. He shared meals with children in the building, once shy, now finding courage and generosity. Vivian observed these moments with a swelling sense of pride, recognizing that the child heart was opening in ways that mirrored her own lifelong lessons: humility, patience, and the joy of giving without expectation. The lessons she imparted were subtle yet profound, shaping Kenny into a boy who could feel deeply, empathize naturally, and act with conscience and integrity. The complexities of her home life continued to challenge Vivian. Her mother's health required constant attention, Tom's schooling demanded time and energy, and her aunt frequently suggested opportunities that promised money but drained her spirit. Each day was a balancing act, a negotiation between duty and desire, between immediate needs and long-term values. Yet, in the midst of these tensions, Kenny's presence became a stabilizing force, a mirror reflecting both her struggles and triumphs, and a reminder that acts of care could ripple outward, touching hearts and shaping lives in ways she had never imagined. Vivian often caught fleeting glances between Kenny and Tom, moments of camaraderie, silent understanding, or playful teasing. These small interactions were profound, reminders of the power of connection. Despite coming from vastly different worlds, the boys found common ground in shared activities, in the gentle guidance of someone who believed in them. Vivian realized that the bonds she nurtured were not just about teaching or protecting, they were about creating space for trust, empathy, and mutual respect. These were lessons that wealth could not buy, and influence could not impose. Evenings became a tapestry of intertwined lives, the clatter of plates as dinner was served, the soft murmur of homework being corrected, the occasional laughter of relief and accomplishment. In these moments, Vivian witnessed growth not as a result of instruction alone, but through lived experience, through being present and consistent, through offering a sanctuary where mistakes were accepted, feelings acknowledged, and love freely given. Kenny's confidence grew alongside Tom's resilience, and in their small gestures of care toward each other, Vivian saw the quiet magic of human connection unfolding. Through it all, she remained aware of the delicate balance she maintained. The pressures of the outside world, the demands of work, the scrutiny of parents, the indifference of society, loomed at the edges of her home life. Yet she persevered, guided by an internal compass rooted in compassion and integrity. Each act of courage, each moment of care, reinforced the invisible threads that connected them all. She recognized that these connections, fragile but genuine, were shaping not only the children before her, but the very fabric of her own existence, revealing strength, purpose, and a vision of life lived with intentional kindness. By the time the night settled over the modest apartment, Vivian felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The complex web of responsibilities, fears, and relationships had woven something extraordinary, a sanctuary where hearts could grow, courage could be nurtured, and trust could be built. She understood that these were the moments that truly mattered, not the polished floors she cleaned or the unnoticed gestures she performed, but the lives she touched, the connections she forged, and the quiet legacy of love and guidance she created within the intimate walls of her home. One crisp morning, a call from Kenny's school shattered the fragile routine of Vivian's household. The voice on the other end was casual, almost dismissive. "Kenny hasn't been home for a few days. Has he been with you?" The question, though simple, carried an unspoken weight, an assumption that the child would be safe wherever he chose to be. It was a world where negligence could pass for normalcy, and concern was fleeting. Vivian's heart tightened, the familiar surge of worry mingling with a flicker of anger at a system that so casually overlooked a child's needs. As she hung up the phone, her mind raced. Kenny's parents were largely indifferent, often preoccupied with their own lives, their focus on appearances and expectations rather than the emotional safety of their child. The realization was bitter. She had known, in some sense, that their care was superficial, but hearing it confirmed, spoken casually, stung more than she expected. Vivian sighed, running a hand over her face, feeling the familiar tension tighten her chest. She glanced at Tom, who was quietly arranging his schoolbooks, unaware of the broader implications. Amid this swirling concern, another discovery struck her with equal force. She learned of the small monthly allowance Kenny received from his parents, a modest sum that, in her household, could cover urgent needs. Bills overdue by weeks, food stretched thin, medical expenses for her mother. This money could offer relief, security, even stability. The temptation was immediate, a quiet voice whispering, "This could solve so many problems for you. You deserve this. You've worked so hard." Vivian's chest tightened again, though now with conflict rather than worry. Her principles were as integral to her as the air she breathed. She had always believed that kindness, empathy, and integrity were currencies far more valuable than money. Taking the allowance without permission felt like a betrayal, not only to Kenny's trust but to her own ethical compass. She sat quietly, tea steaming in her hands, and weighed the two sides of her conscience. The money represented survival, but survival at the cost of her moral core. Could she reconcile the urgent needs of her family with the unwavering values she had always upheld? Kenny, unaware of the ethical storm swirling around him, laughed softly at a drawing Tom had made. The innocence in his voice, the genuine delight in the simple lines of pencil on paper, pierced Vivian's heart. Here was a child, relying on her for safety and guidance, unaware of the power dynamics at play. She felt an overwhelming surge of responsibility. Her choices would affect not just her family, but this young boy who had begun to trust her in a way no one else had. Taking the money would secure immediate comfort. Yes, but at what cost to his understanding of trust and compassion? In that moment, the tension between survival and ethics became almost tangible, pressing down on her like the weight of the city's buildings around her. She thought of her mother's frailty, Tom's earnest questions about the future, the rent overdue by weeks. Yet she also thought of the subtle lessons she imparted daily, lessons in patience, empathy, and moral courage. Would she teach by example or by expedience? The question lingered, echoing in the quiet corners of the modest apartment. Vivian paced slowly, the teacup warm in her hands, considering the ripple effect of her choices. The allowance was not merely money. It was power, a tangible opportunity to change immediate circumstances. Yet she realized that how she chose to use or not use, it could shape more than finances. It could shape trust, character, and the moral landscape of a young life. She thought of Kenny's eyes earlier that morning, wide with fear and longing, and felt the responsibility of her guardianship deepen. He was learning about life, about empathy, about courage and resilience, and she had the chance to guide him with integrity rather than convenience. Hours passed in contemplative silence. Vivian thought of Marta's advice, of the countless moments she had chosen love over ease, patience over resentment, care over judgment. She understood that her life's work was defined not by survival alone, but by the quiet moral victories that often went unseen. Taking the money would solve urgent problems, yes, but it would teach Kenny and herself that expedience outweighed principle. Could she live with that lesson in her heart? She doubted it. As evening fell, she decided, not through grand declarations, but through quiet, resolute action, she chose integrity. The money would remain untouched. Instead, she offered Kenny emotional safety, guidance, and the comfort of being truly seen. The apartment became a sanctuary not only for him, but for her own family, a place where lessons of compassion and ethical courage could flourish without compromise. In these small choices, Vivian understood she was cultivating more than trust. She was nurturing resilience, empathy, and hope. Later, as she tucked Kenny into bed, he looked at her with tentative gratitude. You always help, even when it's hard," he whispered. Her heart swelled. Here was the real value of her life's work. Moments like this, where integrity and care intertwined to shape a young soul's understanding of love and trust. She smiled softly, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "We do what's right, even when it's difficult, she said gently, and in that simple truth, both of them found comfort and clarity. Vivian understood that true opportunity was not always material. Sometimes, the greatest chance to transform lives came through steadfast ethics, quiet courage, and the courage to choose love over ease. And as the night settled over the modest apartment, the city outside continuing in indifferent motion, Vivian felt the weight of her choices with quiet pride, her family safe, a child learning to trust, and her own moral compass unwavering, guiding her steadily toward a future built on compassion, integrity, and hope. The days that followed were a quiet testament to Vivian's courage, patience, and unwavering moral compass. She had chosen integrity over convenience, opting to protect Kinney without touching the allowance that could have eased her family's burdens. The choice weighed on her at first, a tension between need and principle, but she quickly discovered that true heroism often existed in the subtle, daily acts of care that required no applause or recognition. "Send a note to your parents," Vivian instructed gently one afternoon, as Kinney lingered at the kitchen table, coloring a small sketchbook he had brought along. "Tell them you're safe, staying with a friend." "That's enough." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying authority without intimidation. The boy hesitated, the familiar fear flickering in his eyes. He had been so accustomed to neglect, to the indifference of those meant to protect him, that even simple messages of assurance felt foreign. Yet Vivian's steady gaze and patient tone created a bridge over his anxiety, a channel through which trust could flow. Kinney's parents barely flinched when they received the note. Their indifference was palpable, yet Vivian remained unshaken. She understood that influence was not always measured by the reactions of others, and that the quiet acts of courage she performed were seeds sown into the future, visible only to those willing to see. She prepared meals for Kinney and Tom, her movements deliberate and careful, weaving comfort into every plate, every shared bite. Each laugh that emerged from their small conversations was a ripple of reassurance, a reminder that love and care, even when understated, could transform the atmosphere of a home. Vivian's courage extended beyond protection. It was an education in empathy. She guided Kinney in simple acts of kindness, helping Tom with homework, sharing his toys with children in the building, offering small gestures of attention to neighbors and elderly residents alike. At first hesitant, Kinney gradually began to mirror Vivian's compassion, his small hands learning the subtle art of giving without expectation. "It feels good," he admitted one evening, watching a younger child beam at a drawing he had helped complete. The pride in his voice was tentative but genuine, a reflection of a growing moral consciousness nurtured by Vivian's steady guidance. Evenings were filled with quiet heroism. The apartment, modest yet warm, echoed with laughter, the scratch of pencils on paper, and the soft rhythm of voices learning patience and kindness. Vivian's mother observed these interactions with faint smiles, her eyes reflecting pride and relief, though her frailty prevented her from participating fully. Tom's confidence flourished in parallel with Kinney's, as the boys navigated lessons, both academic and moral, guided by Vivian's unwavering support. There were moments, of course, when exhaustion pressed heavily upon Vivian's shoulders. Her back ached, her hands grew sore, and the long hours of labor left her body drained. Yet, in the quiet, she found affirmation in subtle signs. Kinney offering a blanket to a shivering neighbor, Tom correcting a younger child's misreading of a word, a shared smile between the boys as they navigated small challenges together. These gestures, seemingly insignificant, carried profound weight. They were evidence that courage and care, when consistently practiced, could ripple outward, shaping character and hearts in ways no external reward could measure. One rainy afternoon, as the city outside shimmered in a haze of water and light, Vivian paused to watch Kinney helping Tom carefully measure ingredients for a simple recipe. The focus, concentration, and gentle teasing between the boys reflected lessons far deeper than cooking: respect, patience, humility, and empathy. Vivian's heart swelled with quiet pride. Here was a child who had once fled from fear, learning to navigate the world with dignity, compassion, and the courage to care for others. She recognized in him the reflection of her own resilience, the promise that small acts of integrity and love could, over time, create profound change. Vivian's acts of courage were not performed for recognition. There were no accolades, no applause, only the quiet confirmation that her choices were shaping lives in meaningful, enduring ways. She held fast to the understanding that true heroism often required endurance rather than spectacle, subtlety rather than grandeur. The trust she nurtured in Kenny, the patience she extended to Tom, the care she offered to her mother, all formed a network of support and growth, each strand reinforcing the other in a tapestry of resilience and compassion. In those moments, she realized the magnitude of her influence. She was shaping a boy's understanding of empathy and kindness, demonstrating that courage was as much about emotional guidance as physical protection. She was teaching Tom that patience and integrity mattered more than immediate results, and she was quietly affirming to her mother that love and care could thrive even amidst hardship. The lessons were mutual. Vivian, too, was learning patience, humility, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing goodness take root in others. As night fell and the apartment settled into gentle silence, Vivian lingered by the window, watching the city lights glimmer through the lingering drizzle. She reflected on the day, on the subtle victories, the laughter, the small moments of connection, and the quiet resilience of those she cared for. Her heart, though heavy with exhaustion, was buoyed by the awareness that her courage and care were shaping lives in ways both tangible and profound. Even in the face of societal indifference, of the unrelenting demands of work and home, she was planting seeds of hope, empathy, and moral strength that would endure long beyond her immediate efforts. Vivian understood, with a clarity born of quiet experience, that the true measure of a life well lived was not wealth, recognition, or status. It was in the courage to act rightly, the resilience to endure, and the steadfastness to nurture others, even when unnoticed. And in the warmth of her modest apartment, surrounded by those she had chosen to protect and guide, she felt a deep and abiding sense of purpose, that love, integrity, and small acts of courage could, in time, transform the world in ways both profound and lasting. Whispers began to weave their way through Kenny's building like a persistent wind, carrying fragments of suspicion and curiosity. The staff noticed his absence more than they would have admitted, sharing furtive glances and half-formed questions. Neighbors, quick to notice what they deemed unusual, whispered behind closed doors, their voices tinged with judgment. Vivian felt the first ripple of unease settle in her chest, a familiar tension that warned her of the delicate balance she had been maintaining. Every day, Kenny remained in her care without notice, without interference, increased the likelihood of confrontation, of exposure, of loss. Fear fluttered in Vivian's chest, not the fear of punishment for herself, but the fear that Kenny might be forced back into the cold, detached environment from which he had fled. She knew all too well the quiet suffocation of neglect and indifference, and the thought of the boy returning to that world tightened her chest with dread. Her mind raced, cataloging every possible contingency, every precaution she could take to protect him, every lesson she could embed in his understanding before he might be pulled away. Marta, ever observant and steady, became a pillar of support in these tense days. "We need to give him space to breathe," she advised one morning, her voice calm yet resolute, as they sipped steaming cups of coffee. "But we also need to keep his world safe, structured. Balance, Vivian, that's what will protect him." Vivian nodded, grateful for the clarity Marta provided. Her advice was not about controlling or sheltering too tightly, but about providing stability, emotional security, and the freedom to grow. In these conversations, Vivian felt a sense of solidarity, a reminder that even in moments of uncertainty, guidance and support could fortify both her and Kenny. Tom, too, became an unexpected ally. Though younger, he instinctively understood the stakes. He took on responsibilities in small, meaningful ways, preparing meals, tidying the apartment, quietly assisting Kenny with homework. His gestures were subtle but significant, contributing to the creation of a stable environment that reinforced lessons in care, patience, and mutual respect. Vivian watched them both, her heart swelling with pride at the cooperative rhythm that had begun to form, a harmony of care and trust. Kenny, observing Vivian's calm resolve amidst whispers and skeptical glances, began to internalize lessons far beyond the academic. He was learning humility, compassion, and the subtle power of integrity. Each ignored text from his parents, each skeptical look from neighbors, reinforced the contrast between neglect and care, indifference and empathy. Yet Vivian's presence was a constant, unwavering anchor. She guided him not with lectures, but through example, through steady kindness, ethical patience, and quiet moral authority. In her, he saw the possibility of courage expressed without anger, of strength expressed without dominance. Outside, the world continued its relentless rhythm. Neighbors murmured about the boy's prolonged absence, speculated about his whereabouts, and whispered judgments about Vivian's intentions. The staff at Kinney's building, too, observed her with thinly veiled curiosity. Yet Vivian moved with deliberate calm, her body and mind trained to shield both Kinney and herself from the pressure. She taught him that fear could be faced not with defiance, but with understanding, that tension could be navigated not with aggression, but with patience, and that belonging was cultivated not by entitlement, but by connection. The days unfolded as a delicate dance, balancing joy and caution. They spent mornings reading, afternoons helping neighbors, and evenings sharing stories, laughter, and quiet reflections. Kinney's transformation was subtle but profound. He began offering small gestures of care, noticing when someone needed help, sharing his belongings, or offering words of encouragement. These acts, seemingly minor, were monumental to Vivian. They were evidence that empathy, when nurtured, could take root even in the most hesitant hearts. Yet tension remained, a shadow at the edge of each day. Every unexpected knock at the door, every sudden glance from a passerby, reminded Vivian of the fragile nature of their sanctuary. She rehearsed explanations, protective strategies, and gentle redirections in her mind, preparing for the inevitable moment when the outside world might encroach upon the carefully constructed safety of her apartment. Through it all, a fragile but genuine bond deepened between the three of them. Kinney's courage grew, not as a defiance against authority, but as an understanding of empathy and belonging. Tom's compassion blossomed alongside his brother-in-arms, reinforcing lessons of patience and care. And Vivian, in guiding them both, reinforced her own belief that moral courage was not defined by grand gestures, but by consistency, integrity, and unwavering presence. By the end of the week, the household had become a microcosm of growth, resilience, and emotional richness. The whispers and judgment outside could not penetrate the sanctuary Vivian had cultivated. In adversity, bonds strengthened. In uncertainty, courage blossomed. The boy who had once fled fear now discovered the quiet power of belonging, the moral weight of empathy, and the stability that came from being truly seen and valued. In this crucible of tension, Vivian recognized the beauty of human resilience. She understood that true care required vigilance, subtle guidance, and the patience to endure scrutiny without compromise. And as she watched Kinney and Tom sharing a quiet laugh over a homework problem, she felt the reassurance of progress, the silent affirmation that courage, love, and ethical steadfastness could withstand the pressures of the outside world, shaping not only children, but the adults they were destined to become. The day of confrontation arrived like a slow, deliberate tide, pressing against the fragile sanctuary Vivian had built. The tension in the apartment was almost tangible, a low hum beneath the ordinary sounds of dishes, pencils scratching paper, and the occasional bird outside the window. Kinney, for the first time, carried more than fear. He carried the courage born of trust, experience, and the subtle guidance Vivian had nurtured. "I need you to listen," he said to his parents that afternoon, his voice trembling yet steady, the quiver betraying the years of indifference he had endured. Vivian stood nearby, silent, her presence a pillar of calm. She had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act rightly despite it. She saw in his small hands, now clenched in quiet resolve, the embodiment of her own quiet lessons: empathy, integrity, and the capacity to confront injustice with dignity. His parents initially responded with irritation, their brows furrowed, voices sharp with disbelief. "What are you talking about, Kinney?" his father demanded, leaning back in his leather chair as if the sheer act of listening were an inconvenience. "We've done everything for you." The mother's eyes flicked nervously toward him. uncertainty mingling with a habitual indifference that had characterized their parenting. Kenny swallowed hard, then spoke again, voice firmer, words carefully chosen. I've been scared. I've felt alone. But I've learned things about care, about love, about responsibility from someone who actually sees me, who notices when I'm afraid, who helps me without expecting anything in return. His small frame quivered, yet his gaze remained unwavering. He was not yelling, not demanding obedience or pleading for attention. He was conveying truth, offering insight into a life that had been shaped by neglect, yet illuminated by compassion. Vivian watched, her chest tight with emotion. She understood the significance of the moment. A bridge was forming between isolation and acknowledgement, between neglect and awakening. Kenny's courage was not a rebellion. It was a revelation. His parents' irritation gradually gave way to stunned silence, the rigidity of their habits shaken by the unexpected force of genuine expression. Vivian's integrity spoke louder than words could, the quiet power of consistent care rendering authority impotent in comparison. The room held its collective breath as Kenny continued. I've learned that I can care for others, that I can be honest about my feelings, and that being brave doesn't mean being loud or angry. It means doing the right thing, even when it's hard. And I've learned that from someone who never gave up on me. Each word carried weight, each phrase a testament to the lessons absorbed in the sanctuary of Vivian's apartment. The parents, confronted with this unanticipated moral clarity, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the awareness of their own shortcomings reflected in their son's courage. Vivian stepped closer, her presence unwavering, yet unobtrusive. She understood that her role was not to intervene overtly, but to reinforce the moral framework Kenny had internalized. Her eyes met his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of pride and solidarity. The transformation was evident. A boy who had once fled from fear, hiding from the world's demands, now stood rooted in confidence, speaking truth with love rather than anger. The confrontation was a crucible, testing the integrity, patience, and courage of all involved. Kenny's parents, confronted with a mirror of neglect and indifference, could no longer ignore the impact of their actions or inaction. Slowly, tentative questions replaced irritation. What do you mean? His mother whispered, the words heavy with unfamiliar humility. His father's posture softened, and the harsh lines of authority relaxed. For the first time, they were truly listening, not to demands or complaints, but to insight born of care, reflection, and moral courage. Kenny's words acted as a bridge, connecting hearts that had been insulated by habit, pride, and social distance. He expressed his feelings with a combination of fear, hope, and respect, acknowledging their authority while asserting his own needs, inspired by the example Vivian had quietly set. She had demonstrated, without instruction or reprimand, that ethical courage could shift dynamics, turning confrontation into clarity, fear into understanding, and neglect into awareness. In the hours that followed, tentative dialogue began. His parents asked questions, truly seeking understanding rather than control. Kenny, guided by the emotional intelligence Vivian had nurtured, responded with honesty, humility, and patience. The conversation, while tense at times, became a transformative experience, revealing the potential for reconciliation, growth, and recognition of the impact of care and integrity. Later, when the confrontation ended, the apartment felt lighter, charged with a sense of possibility. Kenny's eyes, bright with relief and pride, met Vivian's, and in that glance, gratitude, respect, and trust were exchanged without words. He had confronted fear, injustice, and indifference and emerged empowered, not because of wealth, authority, or coercion, but because of empathy, ethical courage, and the subtle, steady guidance of someone who had believed in him unconditionally. Vivian exhaled softly, feeling the profound weight of the moment settle into quiet satisfaction. She realized that true transformation did not always come through punishment, intimidation, or grand gestures. Sometimes it was found in consistent presence, in teaching by example, and in fostering the courage to speak truth with dignity and love. In that room, in that tense and delicate moment, lives were irrevocably changed. Kenny had matured before their eyes, learning lessons in boundaries, compassion, and self-worth. His parents had glimpsed a new perspective, their indifference tempered by the undeniable moral clarity of the child they had overlooked. And Vivian, silent yet powerful, witnessed the culmination of her quiet heroism, the demonstration that integrity, empathy, and steadfast courage can not only protect the vulnerable, but awaken understanding, foster growth, and redefine relationships. In the days that followed the confrontation, a subtle transformation settled over the household. The tension that had once lingered like a low hum in the apartment eased, replaced by an emerging rhythm of trust, understanding, and gentle accountability. Kenny's parents, still navigating the unfamiliar terrain of reflection and awareness, began to approach him differently, no longer merely as a child to be managed, but as a person to be understood. Their gestures, though tentative, carried a newfound respect, born of witnessing the courage and integrity their son had learned to embody. Vivian observed the changes with quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that true growth was never linear. She watched Kenny approach his parents with calm, reasoned conversations, the previously timid voice now confident in expression, yet imbued with humility. "I want to share something with you," he said one evening as they sat around the dinner table. "I've learned so much from someone who cares, about helping others, about responsibility, about kindness. And I want you to understand why it matters to me." The parents exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and uncertainty, yet the sincerity in Kenny's tone demanded attention. It was in these moments that the depth of Vivian's impact became unmistakably clear. She had been more than a caretaker. She had been a moral guide, a steady presence, and a living example of compassion in action. Kenny spoke of her community work, how she helped children with homework, shared meals with neighbors, and quietly nurtured hope wherever she went. He described her patience, her courage, and her unwavering integrity, and in doing so, invited his parents to witness the tangible effects of care and moral leadership. Moved by the authenticity of his words, Kenny's parents began to contribute to Vivian's project. The financial support, though significant in alleviating material burdens, was far less meaningful than the acknowledgement of her worth, her influence, and the lives she had touched. For Vivian, this was a profound validation, not of status, recognition, or wealth, but of the enduring power of compassion, empathy, and ethical courage. Her once invisible efforts were finally visible in a way that mattered, through tangible trust, sincere appreciation, and the opportunity to expand the impact of her work. Within the modest apartment, a new atmosphere emerged, one infused with connection and mutual respect. Kenny's voice, once soft and hesitant, now carried confidence, understanding, and the subtle authority of someone who had learned that courage and compassion could coexist. He guided Tom with gentle patience, helped neighbors without expectation, and offered small acts of care that reflected the lessons Vivian had taught him. The boys, despite differences in age and background, had formed a bond grounded in trust, ethical growth, and shared experience. Vivian's mother, too, began to sense the changes rippling outward. Though her frailty limited her physical involvement, her eyes sparkled with pride, and her presence radiated calm reassurance. Tom, inspired by Kenny's growth and Vivian's guidance, began to embody responsibility and empathy in his daily interactions, learning to navigate challenges with the same integrity his sister exemplified. Together, the household had become a microcosm of growth, connection, and moral clarity, a sanctuary in which every member learned from and supported the others. The neighborhood, once indifferent or curious, began to recognize the quiet impact of Vivian's work. Children who had been neglected, overlooked, or dismissed now found attention, guidance, and genuine care. Parents, inspired by her dedication, sought advice or assistance, creating a ripple effect of compassion that extended beyond the apartment walls. Vivian's influence, rooted in empathy and ethical courage, became a subtle yet undeniable force for positive change, reshaping lives and perspectives in ways both immediate and enduring. Kenny, reflecting on his journey, understood the profound lessons that Vivian had imparted. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the conscious choice to act rightly, that integrity required consistency, patience, and moral vigilance, and that empathy was a force capable of transforming both the giver and the recipient. In his interactions with his parents, he practiced these lessons, fostering reconciliation without bitterness, respect without subservience, and love without compromise. For Vivian, the reconciliation extended beyond material or emotional support. It was a confirmation that ethical courage, when applied consistently, could bridge divides, reshape relationships, and cultivate enduring trust. She recognized that her influence was not measured by fleeting recognition, but by the subtle, transformative shifts she had inspired in those around her. The boy who had fled fear now approached life with measured confidence. Her brother in arms embodied responsibility and empathy. Her mother felt cared for and respected, and the wider community began to see the tangible results of unwavering moral guidance. In this delicate equilibrium, Vivian felt the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Her actions, guided by compassion, patience, and ethical steadfastness, had nurtured growth in multiple lives, creating a web of positive impact that extended beyond her immediate reach. The once invisible woman had become a catalyst for transformation, her values and courage echoing through the hearts and actions of those she had touched. The apartment, once a space defined by struggle and quiet endurance, now shimmered with vitality, trust, and hope. Every laugh, every shared meal, every act of learning or kindness reinforced the interconnectedness of their lives. Vivian, Kenny, Tom, and even the parents discovered that reconciliation was not simply the cessation of conflict, but the cultivation of understanding, respect, and shared moral growth. The bonds formed through adversity and guided by care were strong, resilient, and capable of withstanding future challenges. As night descended, the family settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Vivian, observing the subtle harmony she had helped foster, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Growth had taken root, reconciliation had blossomed, and the lessons of empathy, courage, and integrity would continue to shape lives far beyond the walls of the apartment. The seeds she had sown in trust, care, and moral courage were flourishing, and in witnessing their impact, she recognized the enduring truth that love, integrity, and compassion could reshape relationships, bridge divides, and inspire lasting transformation. With the support of Kenny's family, Vivian's modest apartment became more than a home. It became a sanctuary, a hub of compassion, learning, and hope. The financial contribution allowed her to expand her community initiatives in meaningful ways, providing hot meals for children who came home to empty kitchens, tutoring sessions for those struggling in school, clothing donations for families unable to make ends meet, and small scholarships to help talented but under-resourced youth pursue their dreams. The ripple of impact was tangible, yet it emerged subtly, quietly transforming lives without the need for recognition or fanfare. Kenny remained by her side, an active participant in her mission. He took on responsibilities with care, patience, and pride, teaching other children the lessons he had learned about empathy, integrity, and courage. He learned to value relationships over possessions, love over fear, and presence over neglect. Every time he guided a younger child through a math problem, comforted a frightened neighbor, or helped serve meals, he reflected the lessons Vivian had nurtured, the quiet power of consistent care manifesting in real, tangible ways. Vivian's mother observed these developments with deep, quiet pride. Even frail and limited in movement, her eyes sparkled as she saw the fruits of her daughter's lifelong compassion. Tom, too, thrived in this nurturing environment, discovering confidence, patience, and the sense of purpose that comes from being part of something greater than oneself. Together, the apartment's occupants created a small but vibrant community, each person contributing their gifts, learning from one another, and offering care that extended beyond the walls of the building. The neighborhood began to notice subtle transformations. Children once overlooked found attention and guidance. Parents seeking support discovered practical help and moral reassurance. Elders living in isolation received companionship and care. Vivian's influence became a quiet yet powerful force, demonstrating that one person's dedication, integrity, and compassion could ripple outward to touch the lives of many. Her once invisible life had grown luminous, defined not by wealth, status, or acclaim, but by the enduring difference she made in the hearts of others. For Vivian, the legacy she was building extended beyond immediate action. It was a philosophy of life, a demonstration that love and dignity could bridge divides, transform relationships, and cultivate resilience in even the most overlooked individuals. She had proven that courage need not be loud to be transformative, and that ethical steadfastness could achieve what authority, wealth, or social status could not. Every child helped, every family supported, and every act of kindness reflected a life devoted to principle and care. Kenny's parents, once indifferent, had grown into allies of compassion. They saw the tangible results of Vivian's influence in the boy's maturity, empathy, and leadership. They participated not out of obligation, but because they had witnessed the power of genuine moral guidance. Their support, both financial and emotional, further reinforced the lessons that Vivian had instilled, demonstrating the profound potential of collaboration grounded in integrity. Even the simplest routines, the sharing of meals, a quiet tutoring session, or a conversation about hope and perseverance, carried weight. They symbolized a shift from survival to growth, from indifference to engagement, and from isolation to community. Vivian's apartment became a symbol of what was possible when generosity, courage, and steadfast care were prioritized above all else. Children who had once been invisible were now seen, nurtured, and empowered. Parents who had felt powerless were given guidance and support. And a community, once indifferent, began to resonate with the quiet force of ethical action and human connection. As evening fell, Vivian stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker in reflection of the tiny victories she had helped nurture. The laughter of children in the courtyard, the sound of footsteps as neighbors interacted with kindness, and the soft chatter of shared stories filled her heart with a profound sense of fulfillment. She understood that her life's work, once invisible, now radiated influence in ways that transcended material wealth or social recognition. The legacy she was building was enduring, grounded in humanity, compassion, and the courage to act rightly in every circumstance. And in that quiet, glowing moment, she thought of Kenny, Tom, her mother, and the countless lives touched by simple acts of care. She realized that the true measure of her success was not the scale of her resources, but the depth of her impact, the lessons taught, the hearts touched, and the hope restored. One person's courage and generosity, she had discovered, could transform entire communities and inspire future generations to act with empathy and integrity. If you've been inspired by Vivian's journey, her quiet heroism, and the way small acts of courage and love can ripple into lasting change, don't forget to follow the channel. Together, we can share more stories that celebrate compassion, resilience, and the extraordinary potential within ordinary lives. Witnessing and spreading these stories is a way to honor humanity, encourage empathy, and remind ourselves that each of us can make a difference, quietly, courageously, and with heart.